Hello, I'm Rula Jibril. I'm a foreign policy expert and a journalist. And I am so honored to be with one of the few captains, a women captain, Madeleine Habib, who's also a humanitarian. Let's start. By age 24, you left home and you became the first captain. What compelled you to do or to take that choice?
At 22, I went sailing for the first time, and it really moved me. Suddenly, I'd found this thing that was a mental and physical challenge, and I thought, that's where I want to be. And I was already an activist. I think I was born an activist. And so using the world of the sea to travel and to be a ship's captain, it was just a perfect fusion for me.
You were arrested and deported multiple times from the United States, from Israel. How's that experience? I mean, you are one of the few women. How many women captains there are outside?
There are very few women captains. Less than 1% of the maritime industry in general is represented by women, and the percentage of female captains is definitely less than that. Being arrested and deported, it's a little bit of a hazard in my career. So that was a Greenpeace action in 1997, and thank you very much to women in the world for supporting me and helping me to come back to the United States, because I have a message.
Let's talk about what's going on now. Last night, the UK, France, the US launched airstrikes against the Syrian regime. This morning, in what we call in the Middle East, the second or the third desert stormy mission, the president tweeted that it was accomplished. What do you think they accomplished with these strikes, and how this will affect refugees?
First of all, I don't really think that it's mission accomplished. It's superpowers muscle flexing and using a third nation as a pawn in a really dangerous game where lives are being lost, and that's unacceptable. You can't bomb your way to peace. Bombing is not a way forward. And yes, it will have an impact on the refugee crisis, because there will be more people displaced. When you bomb a country, when you make a place unsafe to live, people move.
You called your ship Dignity One. Traveling the Middle East, talking to refugees, they always told me, we don't want charity. We are seeking dignity. Is that the reason why you called it Dignity One?
It wasn't me who named the vessel. It was a Médecins Sans Frontières vessel, and I do think that the name was really important. It's something that we all deserve dignity, and we all deserve respect. And I can tell you that when we rescue these people and we take them from the water and they're greeted by an outstretched, ungloved hand, and you look these people in the eye, it might be the first time in years that anybody has shown them kindness. These people are on a horrific journey, and when they come on board our rescue ships, Aquarius with SOS Mediterranean as well, what we give them is dignity, respect, and a safe haven, even for the very short time that we have them on board.
In what conditions you find them?
We find people in really horrific conditions. Nobody enters into one of those boats from the coast of Libya with a real ability to arrive safely on the shores of Europe. These boats are not seaworthy. They are just, by definition, they are vessels in distress. They're incredibly overloaded. One of those rubber boats will have 120 people in it, and it's about half the length of a US subway carriage, in New York. So they're tiny, incredibly cramped. The women and children will be crowded into the middle of the boat. Other people will crush on top of them. They're sitting in a pool of salt water and spilt fuel. It's a horrendous journey, and the boats literally fall apart.
So when politicians across Europe and the United States weaponize the issue of refugees, they call them snakes, they associate them with terrorism, they basically use them as a political tool. I think President Trump multiple times said that there's no women, there's only men who are a threat to Christianity and Christians, and threat to, in certain areas, especially in Italy, they said that they are a threat to the white race. What do you think of that?
That's dehumanizing the situation. Every single person who is in the world is a person. It doesn't matter what your color or your age or your race is. We all have the same rights. We're all worthy of respect. And we should all be able to travel safely and legally to a place of safety. You don't leave home because you want a widescreen TV in Europe. You leave home because home is not a place where you can live anymore. And so you start your journey. You have no idea where it's going to lead you. People are not necessarily in control of their destiny when they end up in one of those boats, and when we save them and when we deliver them to a port of safety, which is a very important part of the journey.
So, Madeleine, you're describing a situation where I think a Somali-born poet said, nobody leaves home until home is a mouth of a shark. Yet, many politicians around the world, and how is that impacting the way average Americans or Europeans are viewing refugees?
I think it can be intimidating, and I know that when I've gone out on deck and been looking into the face of 300, 400, 500 people on the deck of a rescue boat, and it's an overwhelming crush of humanity. But what you have to see is not a problem. You have to see potential energy. You have to see what these people have to offer, and we have to share. The affluent countries, we're just pushing back. We're putting up barriers. We're saying, well, it's okay for us. We have comfortable beds and our lives are good. No, we have to expand. We have to open up. And it's like a balloon. There are 65 million displaced people at this present moment. 32 million women and girls displaced.
So it's not true that there are only men.
It's definitely not true. And it's like a balloon, and if you close a border, you squeeze one point of the balloon, and yes, okay, so they can't pass that way anymore, but it just balloons in another place. And you're not solving the problem by closing borders. We need to solve the problem by creating safe and legal pathways. That's what will solve the problem.
So, can you please tell us, because yesterday we talked about Yemen, today we talk about Syria, where's the overwhelming majority of migrants and refugees come from?
Well, it depends which part of the world we're looking at, and it is a global issue. You can't just say that this is a particularly Syrian issue or a Yemeni issue. It is a global issue. Many of the people that we rescue that are coming through the funnel of Libya, that terrible lawless country that's been in a state of chaos for 7 years, many of those people are sub-Saharan Africans.
So when the Italian government made a deal last year with the Libyan warlords, and they gave them money to block refugees and migrants from migrating, what happened? And we heard about slave markets, and so you're saying that if you block them, that basically something else happens.
Well, there is documentary evidence of slave markets in Libya. You can buy a human. In 2018, you can buy a human for $400. It's just shocking. It's absolutely absurd. Also, it's absurd that we haven't all stood up and said, that is not acceptable. So the conditions in Libya are absolutely awful, and it's really heartbreaking as a rescuer to find yourself in a situation where you're on your way to a rescue. You can see a boat in distress, and then you're told by the Italian Maritime Rescue Coordination Center that this rescue is now going to be conducted by the Libyan Coast Guard. Then it is not a rescue, then it is an interception. And people will jump into the water and try and swim away rather than be taken back to Libya. And to be honest, most of these people cannot swim. And if you can't swim and you jump in the water, you drown. And these are the things that we're witnessing now as the Libyan Coast Guard is legitimized by the Italian government. It's financed by the Italian government, and it's seen as a solution, but it's not. It's not a solution because the international laws of the sea state that if a vessel is in distress, you must rescue the people and take them to a place of safety. So your job is not done until you take them somewhere safe, and Libya is not safe.
So the United States was part of the coalition that bombed Libya. The United States was part of the coalition that bombed Syria. However, none of these countries, whether the UK or the US, wants to take refugees. I think the data about Syrian refugees here, or any refugees, was less than 10 people or 11 people last year.
Well, I can't say that Australia is blameless. We have a very shameful policy of turning back the boats in Australia, and I would like to say that I feel very firmly against that. Yeah, we have a debt. We have a debt to the world because we are comfortable, because we have all of this. And ladies and gentlemen, we have to share.
Madeleine, can you tell us, please, the story of Collins, a woman you rescued?
Yeah, this is a story that really does touch me. Collins was a 25-year-old woman from Cameroon. She was an assistant nurse working in a hospital, and she hadn't been paid for 2 years. So she had to make the difficult decision of leaving her son with her mother and traveling with her husband to the north of the country. The town that they moved to in the north of the country was taken over by Boko Haram. They were kidnapped, they were held in the bush, and a couple of months later, Collins managed to escape with the help of an older woman. 6 months later, they arrived in Libya after a terrible journey. Collins was beaten, the women she was with were raped, and by the time they arrived in Libya, Collins was 8 months pregnant. All of their money was taken from them by people smugglers to pay for their sea passage to Europe. So in the middle of the night, Collins would have been woken and taken with everybody else, forced at gunpoint to get into one of these rubber boats. Collins was separated from the people that she knew and pushed out into the ocean. But actually, Collins was really lucky. It was at the time when I was the captain of Dignity 1 and we were patrolling 25 miles off the coast of Libya. And in the morning, every morning at dawn, we're always looking with binoculars and checking the radar, and we detected that there were these 2 tiny little blips on the horizon. And when you first see them, these little dots, you think, nah, that's a really small boat. There'll be 6 or 7 people. And as you get closer, you realize that boat is packed. So we launched our rescue boats and we distributed life jackets and started. It's quite a delicate operation to bring people on board, because if they do start to panic, if they feel like they're not going to be rescued, or maybe you're going to return them to Libya, people do panic, and that's when they jump in the water, the boats fall apart. So we need to be super careful how we conduct the rescue. And that day we brought 240 people on board our ship in that morning, and everybody greeted with the outstretched, ungloved hand, welcomed on board the ship. And those who needed medical care were taken to the clinic. And Collins was one of those people because she'd gone into labour. And fortunately, we had a midwife on board, Astrid from Sweden, and under Astrid's calm guidance, Collins gave birth to a healthy baby boy 4 hours later, and she named him Divan. And I just think, like, what would it have been like if Collins hadn't been rescued? Can you imagine giving birth in a boat where there's not room to lie down, there's no fresh water, there's no privacy? I mean, what chance would Collins and Divan have had if we hadn't been there? Anyway, I had the joyous duty and task to go out onto deck and to tell everybody that a baby had just been born. And the deck was crowded with people. Everybody's like exhausted and seasick and in shock. And when I told them that a baby had been born on board, it was such a change in atmosphere. It was like everybody's throwing their hands in the air and clapping and singing, and it was really celebratory, and it made me recognize the strength of the human spirit and our ability to have joy and to celebrate and to be hopeful, even in the direst situations. And then that afternoon, I went to the bridge and I was organising the transit back to Europe, working out which port we're going to go to, which is in the hands of the European authorities. And I was recording in the official logbook the birth of a child on board. And it's like, wow, I wonder how many captains get to have that opportunity. That's a really special thing to do. And I was feeling really hopeful. But then I had to have a bit of a reality check and say to myself, but what about Colin's husband? What about Colin's first son? And really, will Collins ever be granted refugee status in Europe? You know, the story is definitely not over.
The story is not over. I just want to remind everybody that 60,000 neo-Nazis were marching in the streets in Poland asking for a Holocaust, second Holocaust, and they were pointing out to refugees. In Germany, we see hate crimes in many of these countries. So weaponizing the refugees have a price, has a cost. When you interact with these European governments that are so scared because they're not thinking about the next generation, they're thinking about the next elections, and we take them to safe havens and to these ports, how do they deal with you personally?
I have to say the climate has changed towards refugees. In 2015, when NGOs were stepping in to fill the gap, this humanitarian need, we were seen as saviours. By 2017, so last year, the atmosphere had really changed. And now We're being criminalized for being saviors. Some of the rescue boats have been seized and accused of cooperating with people smugglers, which is just such an atrocious lie. I can't believe that we would be accused of doing those things. And there is a real change in atmosphere, and there is a rise of right-wing politics, and it's really unfortunate that it's so easy to vilify refugees because they are a different color. It's really easy to say, there's the enemy.
How can we do to counter that rise of hate-filled speech and rhetoric and help your cause?
Well, I'm lucky as a captain and a humanitarian. I can go out there and be on a ship and do something that feels very tangible and very real, but I'm not suggesting that everybody in the audience should go to sea. It doesn't really suit everybody. But what you can do is you can lobby for change. You can welcome refugees and displaced people in your community. You can recognize that everybody has a story. Everybody has a unique story, and some of the stories are really harrowing. So please try not to be judgmental of the people and bring them into your community. And you can support organizations that are on the front line. I would like everybody to be aware of SOS Mediterranean and to know that it's not cheap to keep Aquarius on the sea right now. I just checked just before I came on stage. Aquarius is patrolling off the coast of Libya, and it could be right now that while we're talking, they're rescuing people. So please think about SOS Mediterranean as a frontline organization worthy of support.
We all remember the picture of that child who came from Syria lying on a beach in Turkey, Ilan Kurdi. He was 2 years old, and his mother put him in the best dresses. He and his mother died. 2017 was the deadliest year for refugees, and that coincided with the hate rhetoric. Do you think that was in any way that will stop, or it's stopping because somehow we are seeing the stories of dead children?
No.
No.
And actually that image came from 2015, and it touched a lot of our hearts. It touched my heart. I'm pretty sure that there would be people in the audience who were touched by that image, really moved, very powerful image. It takes more than a picture of a baby on the beach to change things. It takes every single person to stand up and say, we need to be more egalitarian in the world. We need to recognize that there are 65 million people without a home, and we need to right that wrong.
Madeleine, our time is off, but what is the last message you want to say to our audience today? And if there's anything from the poem that you like most about refugees?
Well, there are many beautiful lines in that poem, Home, by Warsan Shire, and one of them is about kissing a boy crazy behind the tin shed. And I think that's such a human thing. It's such a girl thing that you remember that, and then the next time you see that boy, he's holding a gun that's bigger than himself. Well, that never happened to me, but that's the reality for a lot of young girls out there. I don't want that to be their reality. I want everybody to have all the things that I've been lucky enough to have.
Madeleine, your father, you are born in England, but part of your family is Egyptian. Habib is an Egyptian name. Are we all immigrants?
Yeah. And I would like everybody in the audience to tell me if you have a migrant story in your family. Like, raise your hand if you came from somewhere else, or your mum and dad came from somewhere else. I'm pretty sure
Please
that
raise your hand
it's going to be a lot of people out there. Rula, you are a migrant. We are migrants, you know?
It's not a shame to be, we feel like we are ashamed of this word migrants, but we are absolutely all migrants.
It's the human condition to move to try and make your life better.
One of the things that Madeleine and many people around the world told me, refugees is not we have to have this approach. It's not a problem to deal with, it's a reality to handle.
Yeah.
Is that the right approach?
Absolutely, absolutely. We have to embrace it, and we have to recognize that it exists, and we have to ensure safe and legal passage.
Madeleine, I cannot thank you enough. We will see you somewhere around the Mediterranean, but thank you for this amazing, amazing